People are not usually scared because you notice everything. They get tense because your attention threatens the version of themselves they were trying to manage in front of you. Psychology does not have one single study proving that highly observant people frighten others, but several research areas point at the same pattern with surprising consistency. Those areas include interpersonal accuracy, evaluation apprehension, fear of negative evaluation, fear of positive evaluation, the spotlight effect, and the illusion of transparency. And together they explain the reaction well. In plain language, that means some people feel uneasy when they think you can read the gap between what they are saying and what they are actually feeling. The first thing to get right is that noticing people well is not a bad trait by itself. Research on interpersonal accuracy treats it as a real social skill. People who read others more accurately can have stronger marriages, work better as clinicians, and in some settings even be liked more, so the trait is not naturally alienating. That matters, because the internet often turns observation into a fake superpower story, when the evidence points to something more human and more socially delicate. The real issue is not observation alone, it is what your observation does to another person's sense of control over how they appear in the room. Most people are managing themselves constantly, and that performance is not always dramatic. It can be as small as a fake laugh, a softened answer, or a forced calm voice. They hide envy, suppress embarrassment, cover boredom, bury attraction, and smooth over resentment, and the whole system works only if other people do not notice too much. An observant person disrupts that system, because once someone thinks you caught the fake smile or the passive-aggressive pause, their self-presentation gets harder to hold together. That is the first reason people pull back. You make impression management more expensive, and social life runs on impression management far more than most people admit. The second reason is evaluation apprehension, a long-studied social psychology effect showing that people change under observation when they expect they may be judged. A perceptive person does not feel like an empty camera. That person feels like a smart camera, and the difference between being watched and being understood can change the whole room. When people sense insight behind your attention, they start editing themselves harder, because the fear is not just presence, it is interpretation. The third reason is that people already overestimate how visible they are, even before someone observant walks into the conversation. The illusion of transparency is the tendency to think others can detect your inner state more than they really can, and the spotlight effect is the tendency to think others notice you more than they do. Put a visibly observant person in front of those biases, and the internal alarm can get louder fast. Now they feel you saw the insecurity, the lie, the jealousy, or the panic. Even if your read is only partly right, their belief that you can see through them is enough to change their breathing, tone, eye contact, and trust. That is why someone can become guarded around you without any proof that you actually decoded them correctly. The belief alone does part of the work. The fourth reason is that being seen is not always comforting, even when people say they want to be understood. Most people want safe understanding, which means warmth, privacy, patience, and discretion, not instant exposure delivered with the confidence of a courtroom verdict. If your perception lands too fast, too cold, too public, or too certain, it stops feeling like empathy and starts feeling like dissection. That is the moment when someone says, "Stop analyzing me," even if your observation was technically accurate, because the emotional experience was exposure, not care. The fifth reason is more subtle and more surprising. People do not only fear negative judgment, they can also fear positive evaluation. Modern social anxiety research separates fear of negative evaluation from fear of positive evaluation because being singled out, praised, or spotlighted can also create pressure. A highly observant person can trigger both forms at once. Negative fear because you notice something embarrassing, and positive fear because you notice something deeply real. That second one matters in dating and friendship, where being deeply seen can create intimacy fast, but can also remove the person's chance to reveal themselves at their own pace. The sixth reason is asymmetry, because a conversation feels different when one person seems to be reading and the other seems to be read. In romance, power difference friendships, leadership, or therapy-like friendships, that imbalance can make the other person feel studied instead of accompanied. They may like your insight at first, then later feel they can never relax because every pause, tone shift, and eye movement seems to become material in your private file. That reaction shows up in ordinary life more often than people think, and the examples are usually small rather than dramatic. At dinner, everyone hears an awkward pause, but you notice that one person stopped making eye contact right after one joke, and the room tightens the second you mention it. At work, someone says no worries too quickly, and you hear the resentment under the speed of the answer, which makes them feel exposed if you treat it as obvious. In dating, you notice the voice shift that happens when an ex is mentioned, and if you call that out too bluntly, the other person can feel cornered instead of known. Inside families, you can often detect when one sibling is performing calm while boiling underneath, and naming that in front of everyone can make the whole group defensive in seconds. This is where many online takes go wrong, because they start talking about microexpressions as if a face twitch gives you magical access to hidden truth. That claim does not hold up well. Major critiques of microexpression-based lie detection note that those expressions are rare, ambiguous, and far less reliable than pop culture suggests. In one cited high-stakes study, only about 2% of emotional expressions counted as microexpressions, which is far from the fantasy that every liar leaks the truth on command. A better claim is simpler and stronger. Observant people notice patterns, especially mismatches between words and tone, timing, rigidity, overcontrol, avoidance, and changes from a person's baseline. That kind of pattern reading is realistic, and it explains why perceptive people can sometimes read a room well without pretending they can decode every soul in seconds. It also explains why friendships with very observant people can feel intense in both good and difficult ways. Some friends overshare quickly because your accuracy feels relieving at first, but later they retreat because the same accuracy starts feeling too exposing. Others edit themselves constantly around you and slowly turn you into the careful what you say around them friend, even if you are trustworthy and kind. Romance can move even faster because high perceptiveness can create deep intimacy before the relationship has built enough safety to hold that level of truth. Partners often need time to understand their own feelings before hearing them named aloud, and if you identify every discrepancy too early, the bond can feel like live interrogation. At work, the same skill can look like mentorship or surveillance depending on how you deliver it, because colleagues may assume you see through ambition, bluffing, insecurity, or weak preparation. The difference between respect and avoidance often comes down to warmth, timing, and restraint rather than raw accuracy alone. That is the silver lining in all of this. Observing deeply is not the problem. Broadcasting every observation is. The most relationship-friendly perceptive people tend to do three things well. They ask instead of declare, they choose timing carefully, and they pair truth with safety. That first move matters, because interpersonal accuracy works best socially when the other person still feels like a participant, not a suspect under cross-examination. A question such as "you seem a little off" creates room, while a declaration such as "you are obviously lying" creates defense, shame, and the urge to regain control instantly. Timing matters for the same reason, because one accurate sentence in private can heal trust, while the same accurate sentence at a dinner table can trigger group embarrassment and backlash. Privacy changes the emotional math. In public, your insight can feel like exposure. In private, the same insight can feel like protection. Warmth matters because safe understanding requires more than accuracy. It requires the person to feel that your goal is care, not scoring points with a correct read. That is why accuracy without tact often feels controlling, especially in romance, where emotional pacing matters just as much as emotional truth. A partner may be grateful that you notice the voice shift around an ex, but not grateful if you name it before they understand their own reaction. Friendships show the same pattern when someone overshares fast because they feel seen, then retreats later because the speed of the seeing became too intense. At work, a manager who catches bluffing and insecurity can become respected if the read turns into coaching, or feared if the read turns into surveillance. The core difference is whether your perception gives people a safer way to be honest or removes their chance to stay regulated while they figure themselves out. This is also why the microexpression myth can distract people from the real social skill, which is not magic lie detection but noticing context, mismatch, and change from baseline. A fake smile matters less by itself than the fact that it arrived with rigid shoulders, fast agreement, and a tone that did not match the words. Those baseline shifts are what make observant people seem uncanny, because they are reading patterns across time rather than chasing one dramatic face twitch. There are practical ways to make your awareness easier for other people to tolerate without becoming fake or blind. Signal warmth before insight, because people can handle being seen better when the first thing they feel from you is safety rather than sharpness. Do not make every silence meaningful out loud, because not every pause needs a diagnosis, and constant verbal analysis teaches people to brace before they speak. Avoid rewarding yourself for being right about people, because that little private pride changes your energy in ways other people often feel before they understand it. Leave room for error, because even strong interpersonal accuracy is still inference, not mind reading, and humility lowers threat without lowering awareness. Let people keep some emotional privacy, since being understood and being dissected are not the same experience, even when the facts inside both experiences overlap. So if people sometimes fear you, it may have less to do with supernatural insight and more to do with the social cost of being easier to read in your presence. That social cost grows when people already carry fear of negative evaluation, because then your attention sounds like a grade, not a conversation. It also grows when people carry fear of positive evaluation, because being singled out as deep, special, or fully understood can feel like a spotlight they never asked for. The spotlight effect and illusion of transparency then add pressure from both directions, making ordinary interactions feel bigger and more revealing than they really are. That is why some people become awkward around a perceptive friend before that friend has even said anything difficult. The imagined exposure starts running ahead of the actual conversation. A calmer approach changes that pattern by slowing the pace, keeping observations private, and letting the other person confirm or reject your read without humiliation. In practice, that can mean noticing the resentment in the quick no worries, then choosing not to confront it until the work tension can be discussed safely. It can mean hearing pain in the X story, but waiting until the date has enough trust that the question feels caring instead of invasive. It can mean seeing that one sibling is boiling under fake calm, but refusing to turn a family dinner into a public trial over it. Each of those choices protects dignity, and dignity is often the missing ingredient when insight turns frightening. It also protects pace, because many people need time to understand their own feeling before another person puts a label on it with confidence. When you respect that pace, interpersonal accuracy starts feeling like empathy instead of surveillance, and the relationship has room to breathe. That is the difference between becoming the careful what you say around them friend and becoming the one person who notices without humiliating anyone. Once people learn that your accuracy arrives with privacy and restraint, the same observational skill that once raised their pulse can lower it instead. That shift is small in behavior but huge in feeling, because safety changes what being seen means. In other words, the same perceptiveness that once felt like judgment can start feeling like refuge once the other person trusts your restraint. Your attention threatens the mask, the script, the fake calm, the edited answer, and the timing by which people hope to reveal themselves on their own terms. But when you combine sharp observation with patience, softness, and discretion, the same trait that once made people flinch can become the exact reason they trust you. If this hit close to home, watch the next video on how to use strong perception without pushing people away, because the line between insight and exposure is thinner than it looks.